Yes. Good day, all together. My name is Chester Hågård, and I'm the head of the Institute of Social Science, Economics and Journalism here at Ilisimatusarfik. Our institute is formally the inviter of today's big event, and my job is to officially get this PhD defense started. So first of all, I will remind all of you to close your mobiles. The title of today's PhD defense is Towards Meaningful Youth Engagement, Breaking the Frame of the Current Public Participation Practice in Greenland. So first of all, welcome to you, Anna-Sofie Skjervedal. Also, of course, welcome to the assessment committee, Professor Grete Hovsrud from Nord University in Norway, Professor Bram Noble, University of Saskatchewan, I hope I get it right, in Canada, who is with us online. And to you, Associate Professor Eva Lyne, who is also the chairman of the assessment committee, Department of Planning, Aalborg University in Denmark. And of course also welcome to Anna-Mari Hansen, who has been the supervisor of this PhD, and hopefully Mark Nuttall is somewhere with us also in cyberspace, who has been the other supervisor. This defense is one of the results of the good relation between Ilisimatusarfik and Aalborg University, which we are of course happy to continue and develop further. Finally also, of course, welcome to you in the audience here and the ones out in cyberspace. We are broadcasting this event. And finally, I will pronounce that the doors now will be closed, and I will give the word to today's moderator, Professor Eva Lyne.
Thank you. I had a long piece of paper, or words I should say, but now I guess you had said most of it. I will only tell you about the process today. Being moderator is just like being a toastmaster on a party, that you have to make sure that everything is going in the right way and doing the right direction, etc. So what will happen today is that in a few seconds, Anna-Sofie will give her presentation. It takes around 45 minutes, plus minus. Then we will have a break, and then we will start again at around 2 o'clock. And there the committee will ask a list of very important, at least the committee finds it very good questions. Let's see how it works. And that will take 2 hours, and that's a very formal part. It is, and these PhD defenses, there's a rule that the audience is not allowed to ask questions unless you come to me as a moderator in the break and let me know that you would like to ask a question, because then I can set aside time for it. So no questions unless you ask me, and please again, the mobile phone, please turn them off, because I know it can be, from myself, it can be very disturbing to stand up here and suddenly you have to react to something happening in the audience. Yes, after these 2 hours of critical questions and good dialogue, we will have a reception, and at that point I'll know where it is. So, and the committee will go to another room and make the final assessment, and we'll come to the reception and read aloud the final beautiful words, I hope. Good. So, Anna-Sofie, the floor is yours.
Yes. Thank you, Eva. Can you hear me well enough? Okay, let me know if you can't. Well, thank you for this very kind introduction, and also a great thanks to my assessment committee, who have provided much valuable feedback throughout the assessment process. I'm most grateful for this. I'm also grateful for your presence here today, all the way from Denmark and Norway, and via a direct line from Canada. So thanks to, again, all of you who have come here today and is following the defense online. I'm really happy that I get to share my piece of research with you, what I've been working on for the past 5 years. Sorry. And I'm a little nervous, I have to say, because, well, it means a lot to me. Today I'm going to talk about how a visual anthropological approach may be coupled and feed into the field of public participation, potentially facilitating an opportunity for more meaningful engagement experiences and contribute to uncover valuable perspectives among youth for sustainable decision making. So, first here is a visual illustration of the PhD project. So, what you actually see here is the process that I've gone through. It starts from the initial findings, from the initial fieldworks, and go all the way around here to 2017, where I conducted my last youth pilot study. So what we have is the human in the center here, and that I placed the human in the center because I want to stress the voice of the people. I really agree with Nielsen et al., who argue that it is the human dimension that makes public participation interesting, because public participation is, or at least it should be, about the public. It is about humans, and it's about our relations and preferences and social reality, which may be so diverse and which changes continuously. So moving outwards from the center, we have the fieldworks, the first public consultation round trip in northwest Greenland in 2012, yet another public consultation round trip in 2013 in the same area, and then we have the photo forum study here, which is an explorative youth study using photo elicitation and online participation forms to facilitate meaningful engagement among youth, I hope. And the final field trip. Further outwards, we have the objectives, and we have the research methods, and the key findings. And the arrows here, they illustrate how the initial findings, or the findings of the respective studies, have fed in an inductive manner into the next study. So the findings have guided my research. This gray arrow here, moving all the way around the circle, or the PhD project, illustrates that from here, where I had observed, made interviews, conducted questionnaires, that my focus on youth started, and also the visual dimension, and how it became the overall framework of my thesis. Before we move on to the research questions, I will, through the next few slides, just briefly go through the case from which the PhD project took its point of departure. That is public participation in relation to oil and gas exploration activities in northwest Greenland. So when talk falls on the future development of Greenland, it often includes the expanding extractive industry sector. And the tube maps on the slide illustrates, I know it's blurry, sorry, It illustrates the vast resources that Greenland have. Here we have the vast mineral deposits, and over here we have the oil licenses, showing the amount of activities that took place when I conducted the first field study in 2012. So the activities, they were very intense at that time. The development has grown very fast in the last decade, and the recent exploration activities off the coast have already sparked societal change and impacted the local communities. Within the social impact assessment communities and by various scholars, such as Van Clay and Esteves, public participation is highlighted as a vital precondition for a proper identification and management of social impacts. So in Greenland, as throughout the world, public participation is required in most impact assessment programs to ensure that projects meet citizens' needs and are suitable to the affected public. However, as is evident from the component studies and the studies both within and external to Greenland and outside and within the extractive sector, there seems to be commonly experienced challenges in reaching the full potential of participation and to provide meaningful opportunities for the local communities to influence decision making. And this is what I tried to illustrate here on this slide, that we have the high standards and objectives for public participation in the guidelines, in the formal legal requirements, and over here we have public participation in practice. And there seems to be this gap from the high standards and aims set for public participation and how public participation actually plays out in reality. The challenges relating to public participation is, for instance, late timing, providing available information and accessing this information, and the lack of real influence on the decision-making processes. So these are just some of the criticism that has been highlighted by many scholars throughout the world. We have, for instance, Innes and Boer in the US. We have Lockheed and O'Fagelake in Australia. We have Udovia in Canada's Arctic, and we have Owen in Denmark. We have Marat and Mali in Slovenia, and I could go on. And this is also what I've observed during the public consultation round trips that I've participated on. So these observations and findings and the literature studies throughout conducted in this PhD that I've come across, there seems to be this big gap. And drawing on such experiences and lessons learned within public participation research, I state the case that the current primary public participation process and practice often fails to induce meaningful opportunities for engagement and capture the perspectives of youth in particular. So, one of the ways you can talk about public participation is, among others, that participation can be differentiated into various different levels. As explained by Hansen, Arnstein, and O'Fagelake, the levels range from the more passive participation, such as information sharing, information meetings, to participation by consultation, such as public hearings and open houses, to more deliberate and interactive participation by means of, for instance, workshops, negotiation, mediation, and something, sometimes even co-management. The illustration up here on the slide is developed from a framework by O'Fetcherley that I've mentioned before. And it presents the public participation purposes divided into 3 levels where participation increases continuously. So here we have the lowest level, and then we go up, and this is the highest level. And I just want to emphasize that this is a very simplistic model. There are various levels, and they often, one component from one level can also emerge into one of the other levels. So it's not that it's static or inflexible. It's flexible. So, based on my initial observation and experiences with public participation, emphasized also by various scholars, the participation level often ends up as this lower level, where participation roughly constitute information meetings, and reflects what Innes and Boer describes as sound bites of a few representatives of local communities. This is also what I've seen on the public consultation tours, that often on these meetings that at least I have participated on, it is 2 or 3 people that ask questions or pose their concerns. Moreover, my observations revealed a striking low representation of youth in particular. So this lack of youth is not unique to Greenland, I have to emphasize that. Despite a growing recognition over the last 50 years or so of participatory planning for community development in project development, as is stressed by scholars such as Driscoll and Checkaway, Marat and Marley, youth participation is rarely applied in practice. So here we come to my research question. How do you actually ensure youth participation and a participation in practice that is meaningful? More specifically, how may meaningful youth engagement be facilitated? That's the research question I'm trying to answer in my dissertation altogether. And I will explain now how the visual dimension came into the picture, so to speak, and ended up as the constituting framework or focus on my research. There. When I first started this PhD project, the visual approach was not something that I had considered or planned when the project was launched, but retrospectively, when looking back, I have discovered that the visual dimension actually was very much present in my own fieldworks as documentations of my observations supporting the findings. The images here are snapshots from a living room at the Hotel Anna from my first consultation trip back in 2012. And as is often the case when you're traveling in Greenland, bad weather and logistics had that we had to stay in Rana for a couple of more hours, despite having a very, very strict program. So I went to sit in the common living room, and these 2 local women, they enter, and we start this conversation. And among others, I asked about the cultural artifacts that were on the wall. For instance, the very impressive pearl handicraft here on the living room table, the traditional hunting equipment, the photos, and this huge killer whale mandible. These visual representations, as they indeed are, they give birth to stories that I would not otherwise have acquired about their traditional hunting practices. I did not know, for instance, that a killer whale know who's killed it, so it will try and hunt the hunter. And also I learned of their friendship with the Crown Prince of Denmark, and that one of the women had actually attended the royal wedding. And I also learned about their perspectives on the future, and the future of two boys. Like, it was an elder woman and then her adult daughter, and then she had two boys. And they emphasized, when I asked whether they would become hunters like their father, that no, they were to have an education because the future of a hunter was too uncertain. So these stories made a big impression on me, both because of the family's staunch efforts to secure a good future for these two boys, but also because the stories speak of a time of change in Greenland. And it sparked my curiosity to find out more about about the perspectives that the young Greenlanders have of development, the future development in Greenland, and how or whether they see themselves play a role in this development. So, of course, this appeared to me retrospectively, as I just explained. And at first it was, first and foremost, it was previous empirical studies about how to engage youth through visuals throughout the world that have inspired and guided my visual anthropological approach to participation. From other studies here in Greenland, such as that as Jette Rygaard, she's sitting right there, and the studies of Capello, Clark, Carabelli and Leon, and Jurgensen and Sullivan, I became aware how visuals may be consciously used actively, to guide conversations, to take you places where you might not, as a researcher, be ever able to enter, and to open windows to information and knowledge you might never have come to know or have thought of yourself. And I decided to explore eliciting youth perspective through photo elicitation. As the visual anthropologist Sarah Pink says here, images are everywhere. They permeate our academic work, our everyday lives, our conversations, our imaginations, and our dreams. They are inextricably interwoven with our personal identities, narratives, lifestyles, cultures and societies, as well as with definitions of history, space, and truth. In this sense, every day, we move through this landscape of visual representations. You encounter them when we go down the city center, past a bus stop, when we go grocery shopping, when we look at the clock to tell the time, or when we open the photo family album. The picture on the slide here is one of my snapshots from Ghana. And I was very taken with the colors and the environment that is very different from the surroundings here in Nuuk. Like the rooftop of the houses here almost reflects in the fells behind them. So To me at last, this is a picture that evokes memories, and I can, by looking at it, almost recall how it was standing there in the quietness of the midnight sun and gazing out over the city and the fells. And this is what images can do. They can speak to us by evoking memories, our thoughts and emotions, and almost, although this is often on an unconscious level. So, in this way, the visual permeates our way of communicating, like photo posts on social media, and it plays an essential role in the way we come to understand our contemporary world. This is one of the photos produced by one of the young research participants of the component explorative use study, expressing her perception of her own future. And I just want to illustrate here, as explained by Hawkins, that we all interpret and ascribe different meanings to a visual image, such as this photograph. When you look at the image, you will inevitably interpret and make sense of it from within the context in which it is presented, of course, as well as your own background and knowledge and experiences and ways of understanding plays into how you make sense of things. So images are in this way culturally bounded and find their meaning within a specific culture. As stated by Dan Sperber and close to the idea of Gertz, we do not merely observe, we understand, and we do not merely describe, we interpret. Therefore, the visual, at least in research, cannot stand alone. We need words to elicit the meaning of the visual images, as perceived and intended by the producer of the image. The young woman here expressed her perception of the future by this image, and by adding that in 10 years I will be working as a nurse, living in Nuuk and having a family of my own. Up till then I will have had an internship in Tanzania and Vietnam, worked as a nurse at Doctors Without Borders, and in a war zone. The picture here symbolizes the road forward at the only highway in Greenland, the ice by Umanam. Now you would never have come to these conclusions by merely looking at the photo itself. This is why it's so important to add annotations to the visual images when doing photo interviewing, to find out what the producer of the photos intended the meaning of the photos to have. So the written word that accompany these images are very important and will convey the meaning intended. I will let the statements of the participants' experiences with engaging in this visual explorative use study speak for themselves as I read them out loud. One of the young participants stated that, "I think the visual dimension was a great help for the participants. You get inspired, and it would have been truly boring without them. When I look at my photos, they bring forth my thoughts. The photos symbolize and reveals the feelings that I have." Another one also said that, "I think it's essential that people know about us, the young generation in Greenland. Perhaps this can serve as an eye-opener. Through this project we could have a voice be heard." So there are indications from this study, at least, that the youth wants a voice in the public debate, and there should be a space for them where they can utter their thoughts, concerns, aspirations for the future, their interests, values, too. The input provided by the young participants indicate that there is much to gain from youth as a resource. They have much at heart and at mind, and their insights and perspectives which also at some points contradict the plans of decisions made for the future in Greenland on political level. For instance, I tried to ask them how they saw their role in the future extractive industry development in Greenland, and many of them, they said, well, we don't want to work in the extractive industry. We have other plans for our future. And their social relations, their family and friends, they were of a greater importance to them than for where they saw themselves actually, whether they saw themselves actually having a future in Greenland. And when it comes to finalizing their education and other goals they set for themselves, family and friends were also a vital element. So themes such as culture, traditions, identity, nature, Greenlandic independence, and language also came up. And these are very different perspectives from what I've heard at the public consultation meetings in 2012 and in 2013. The sound bites, if I can call them that, because that was very much what was always brought up at the meetings, was on training and work opportunities and impacts on wildlife and environment from the oil exploration activities. Relating back to the research question, as to how youth participation may be facilitated, the visual approach proved potential to prompt visual records of knowledge from the perspective of the informants, which uncovered new perspectives and insights and more in-depth informing decision-making. It created a sense of empowerment and ownership among the participants by the creation of a common language, in a sense. These visuals functioned as a kind of common language. And it was also a flexible approach where the participant could participate on their own terms. It facilitated learning also in the sense, at least, that the challenge of expressing themselves within the 4 themes I had provided, which was, what are your values and interests? What are your concerns and fears? What are your hopes and dreams? And where do you see yourself in the future? Trying to express yourself through photos within these themes was not an easy task. And many of the issues here was not something that the participant had actively thought of directly before. So, and also the participants through the study got inspired and had their values sharpened by following each other's input. Just take a break. It also strengthened the validity and reliability of the input that was gathered, as they, by emphasis of this written annotations added, emphasized their own views, which at the end could lead to better and more legitimate decisions and solutions made. Further, drawing on the level presented earlier, the framework level, the visual approach at least indicated a potential to move participation from here to steps up the ladder to here, reaching the marginalized youth, and leveling the power relationship, in a sense, between the researcher and the participants to a more equal one. Because it's a co-production of knowledge, really, that happened. But in essence, like the children's spokeswoman Aviaya E. Lybert puts it, participation means being curious and truly interested in the lives of people, also children and youth. It's about their everyday lives, and giving voice to the youth make really good sense, as they have the greatest insight into their own situation, and by listening to them, we can gain insight into what stirs among youth. And that may in the end lead to decisions and solutions that turn out to be more sustainable, as they found on the experience, knowledge, and perspectives of lives of youth from youth themselves. Now, as we're lagging towards the end of the presentation, I just want to emphasize my role as a researcher for the process, the methodological path chosen, as well as the analysis and the conclusions reached. And also the learning process it has been for me conducting this PhD, where I have come to grow wiser, both on myself at a personal level, but also as a researcher. And these two things cannot be entirely separated. In coherence with my interpretivist stance, you cannot just enter the field without continuously influencing the setting and being influenced yourself. And I try to illustrate that up here, because you cannot just stay in your own little bubble. You influence the environment, and the environment influences you. So, just as the research participants, I also carry along my own background and experiences. My knowledge, the values I have, ways of perceiving the world around me too. For instance, the snapshots that I've taken during my fieldworks emphasizes and supports something, but something is always also left out, and you have to remember that. And also, the photos that I have produced myself is also framed in a certain way from the way of my perspective and what I've focused on. So when participating as an observer on the public consultation trips, or when I followed the activities on the photo forum group, I have not merely observed, but been engaged with the process of understanding. I have not just described something, I have interpreted it. And Bryman speaks of this double interpretation, where you actually interpret others' interpretations. So it's kind of complicated. But through the conventional interviews and the photo interviews, the participants and I have engaged in a communicative interaction process, where I have taken in their stories and input and interpreted within my own social scientific frame. Conducting the research have been and is still a continuous learning process. Just making this presentation was a bit of a learning process exercise as well. It just never stops. At the public consultation meetings, I have also taken a learning role by entering the field. In line with the anthropologist view, it is not possible to explore the world without being a part of it. And it's just like you can't just pull out a camera in a room and without influence the people that are there. They like, oh, is my clothes right? Do I have something between the teeth? So the photo is staged in a way, and you influence that setting as a researcher So you can't be entirely visible in a setting. Being part of the setting in various ways, primarily moving back here with my family to Nuuk during the conducting of this PhD project, have had a great impact on how or my ways of perceiving. My previous 10 years abroad, prior to my return, have enabled me to view Greenland from a kind of outside perspective. But returning home, being here, and breathing the same crisp, cold, dry air, Greenland has come under my skin again. And yeah, so to speak, for better or for worse. And I tell you, it's not easy walking a stroller in 3 meters of snow. As an at least fairly young Greenlander, I would say, I have the advantage of knowing the culture and the local content, at least to a large extent. This includes also knowing the ways and norms of communication, as well as communication channels. Being a fairly young Greenlander myself, I have experienced how I was able to mirror myself in many of the participants' answers and perspectives and reflections. And I've also come to learn something about myself too in that process. During the PhD project, I have also been given different labels. I have been one of them, traveling with the oil exploration companies and authorities that I travel with, where people said, oh, you better get it right, and you must do this and this and this. And I've been labeled the researcher. But also, when talking to people, as it often happens here in Greenland, to my experience, they have tried to place me within a family clan, like asking, what is your last name? Who are your parents? And then I became all of a sudden like the granddaughter of my grandmother. And then I was no stranger anymore. And that influenced the way of communicating and interacting with the informants. So yeah, it opened up a different way of engaging with people. And that is something that I take from here. And there are also many other important lessons to me to take on further as a researcher. But one of the ever-inspiring as well as frustrating things is that once you finally dig your way into something, it's like a never-ending process of learning, really. You're never done. You can always do better, and there's always more to learn and more to discover and more paths to follow, and different ways of seeing things. So the findings of my thesis merely seem to be the beginning of something. The answers only seem to prompt more questions to be answered. For instance, most of the young respondents that were active participants in my study were women. Why is that? Do males and females engage in different ways? Did the visual dimension appeal to females better than men, or what is it? And what happens outside the formal participation sphere, around the dining table, in the living room, in the classroom? How do people talk about what the knowledge they have gained and what is brought forth and what is left out? How does it influence their perceptions? And also, who are the right stakeholders and what is the right way of public participation? What works, what doesn't work, and why? More empirical research investigating what is meaningful to whom. what is meaningful and to whom, and also the why question again, is arguably still needed to break the frame of the current public participation practice. Thank you.